Hi guys, so as promised, I wanted to come on here and talk a little bit more about the grading criteria that we use to grade essays in this class. So this video is going out to my basic composition and my expository writing classes because, as you'll see and as I've probably mentioned at this point, we use the same exact rubric, the same exact grading criteria for both of those classes. So you have access to the grading criteria. It's been on Canvas since you first got invited to the class. So you'll see two links, one called Grading Criteria with Full Explanations and another one called Grading Criteria Condensed. I'm going to be primarily using the condensed version in this video and throughout the semester. It's a lot shorter, right? Condensed. It's a lot easier to work with. The full explanations document basically just further breaks down all of the categories that are on the condensed version. So if you were ever like, wait, what exactly do you mean by thesis? Or, this seems arbitrary. What's the difference between a B and a C plus? That longer version breaks down all of those finer distinctions. So work with the condensed version. If you have questions, if you want to understand something better, check out the extended version, and then of course ask me if you ever want to talk through some of these expectations further. So when you look at the grading criteria, there's a few things I want you to notice. First of all, there are only a few grades that a paper can get in this class. So you can get an A, a B plus, a B, a C plus, a C, or an NP, which stands for not passing. And when it comes time to put a grade on your transcript at the end of the course, the same thing applies, right? These are the only grades that we honor in the writing program. So that means that a D is not passing. It also means that there are no minuses, right? There's no A minus, B minus, C minus. You can only end up with one of these letters that's on this rubric, on this grading criteria. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is the categories that we are judging, that we are measuring for when we look at your papers. So there are four. There's one called Thesis, one called Work with Assigned Text, one called Structural Coherence, and one called Presentation. Presentation is a teeny tiny category all the way to the right, and we bury it back there because it's not as important as the other ones. So presentation is like the proofreading category. Is it a well-edited, well-proofread document, right? So that's where we're looking at spelling, grammar, citations, formatting, all of that sort of stuff. That's not my priority in this class, so you can have kind of messy grammar to an extent. But as long as I can understand what you're saying, I'm going to primarily be focusing on and engaging with your ideas, the quality of your arguments. So the only way that this kind of like proofreading, editing stuff would wind up affecting your grade is if it's so dramatic that I can't understand what the paper's trying to say. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, proofread your papers, edit your papers, have somebody else look it over if you know that you are not the best proofreader, but don't spend too much time stressing out about that category. That is not at all our focus. Our main focus, especially starting off in the course, I would say is that middle category, Work with Assigned Text. This is the close reading category. So an A in this category, an A paper would confidently, I'm reading right from the rubric, confidently close read textual evidence to arrive at original interpretive insights. So that means you're looking at direct quotes. This is the stuff in the body paragraphs of your paper. You're looking at direct quotes and you're analyzing, you're interpreting them, right? You're pushing past summary, you are commenting on them, you're making observations, drawing connections to the other text or texts that you're working with, right? You're looking at specific moments and you are making original comments about those moments. This is what you should be focusing on right now in the class, and this should always be your starting point in any paper that we write in this class, okay? Find good evidence, find idea-rich quotes, moments where the author is conveying some idea of his or her own, and engage with it, right? Respond to it, comment on it, point interesting things out about it, connect it to interesting terms and concepts in the other text that you're writing about. That is an absolute essential element to doing well on these papers. It also talks about a clear sense that the essay contributes to an ongoing intellectual conversation and that it may employ unanticipated interpretive context to make textual connections. That's a lot of fancy language. I wouldn't worry too much about that right now. I'm reading the characteristics of an A paper, right? So it's not uncommon to finish basic comp or XPOS without ever having written an A paper. It's not uncommon, if I do see an A paper, for it not to pop up until paper 3 or 4. So yes, always reach for that as your goal, of course. But I hope that you'll take my advice when I'm telling you kind of what to prioritize at these early stages, okay? So make sure you're looking at direct evidence and that you are talking about it in a specific way and in an original way. When I say original, I mean in a way that's not just summarizing it in the author's words. Okay, so we'll call that our most important category right now. Second most important category, thesis. So thesis refers to the argument that you're making in the paper, the central argument. I always tell students, and actually I should mention, there's another document related to this up on Canvas called How to Approach and Structure Essays, where I talk a little bit more about what should go into each paragraph, how much time you should spend on it, how I'm suggesting you kind of move through the brainstorming and drafting process. So do take a look at that. But in that document, I talk about how I always am going to suggest that you start with close reading and then wait and see if and when an argument emerges from that close reading. So I've been teaching writing for a while. I was a student of writing for many years. And I know that there's a tendency to come up with a thesis first and then kind of gather evidence and write a paper to match that thesis. I'm strongly suggesting that you try to reverse that process. And I'll always use the analogy of like detective work, right? If you walk into a crime scene, you have to solve this mystery, right? You're not going to go in with the answer and then look for evidence that fits that answer. That would be dishonest, right? That would be like framing someone or whatever, manipulating the evidence. What you would do instead is just start noticing things, right? Start gathering things. And then from that evidence, once you've collected a pool of it, then see what answer it leads you to. I'm going to advise that you try to do the same thing in these papers. Don't worry about having an argument, right? Worry about finding good, interesting evidence. Worry about what you're going to say within those body paragraphs about that evidence. Worry about what interesting connections you're noticing between the texts. And then after you've spent some time doing that, then take a step back and say, is there some argument here, right? Often you'll kind of stumble your way into a thesis statement or a thesis that you wouldn't have been able to come up with off the top of your head. Few important notes about your thesis for these papers. Number one, it has to be original. So if your paper is arguing the same kind of thing that the author already argued, one or both authors already argued, it's not going to be a passing paper. I'm going to say that one more time. If your argument pretty much repeats something that the other author or authors have already argued, it is not going to be a passing paper. That is a shock for a lot of students. It's not uncommon in XPOS for half the class to NP the first paper. It's not uncommon for the entire class to NP the first paper or two in basic comp. Basic comp students, you are preparing to get to XPOS, right? So as I said, XPOS students themselves struggle with this in the beginning of the semester for most of the semester. So you are preparing to get to that level. This is not a class where you should be beating yourself up if you don't see an A on paper one, or even if you NP paper one. That's totally normal. That's totally natural. It's built into the grading process for this class. So your paper grade, your paper portion of the class, is based on your highest sustained performance on papers in this class, which means if you NP papers 1 and 2 and then you get a B and a B plus, we're going to be looking at that B and B plus when we are determining your paper grade. So you can almost think of it as like dropping your lowest grades sort of thing. We do this again because everyone is practicing, everyone is learning. This is trial and error. We assume that there's going to be some stumbling early on, and as long as you stick with it and you take the feedback and you work on revisions, you should see that improvement arc, right? And you will get judged at the end of the semester based on the best stuff you produced, not the weakest stuff you produced, okay? All right, so a thesis, again, at the very least, it has to be original. It should be present throughout the entire paper. So once you state it at the end of your introduction, and by the way, that's where I'm going to be looking for it at the end of your introduction, it should then be present for the rest of the argument, right? Every topic sentence, every body paragraph, every piece of evidence you pull in, every discussion that you conduct should somehow point back to that argument that you posed in the beginning. So make sure you're saying something argumentative, right? Something debatable. Make sure it's different than what one or both authors already argued, and make sure you stay focused on it throughout your paper, okay? That's the characteristics of a passing thesis. A strong thesis then would be like, is it complex, right? Is it complicated? Does it evolve throughout the paper? Do you consider objections and work them into strengthening your argument? All of that will kind of move you up the grade ladder, right? To a C plus, to a B, to an A. But for now, I would say worry about getting a passing paper under your belt, right? Worry about writing something at that C plus level, so that you know it's out of the way, and then we can work you up the scale. Students hate me saying that. In a way, I hate saying that because, of course, I want you to like reach for the stars. I want you to be ambitious, but I also want you to be strategic, right? And they can be tricky papers. This can be tricky classes. So make sure you're kind of able to tackle the minimum requirements, and then we'll have fun from there. Okay? So number 1, find good, interesting evidence. Make sure you have some points of connection between the texts so you can talk about them side by side. And then once you've done some of that close reading, maybe you've looked at 2, 3, 4, 5 different quotes from your various texts. You've conducted some close reading discussions, then see what thesis you can state that will tie them all together, okay? So a central argument to your paper that's different from the authors, and that is developed, supported through discussions where you close read bits of evidence, okay? I could really stop there, but of course I'm not going to stop there because there's one more category, structural coherence. So this is basically the organization category. I would say once you have had some practice close reading, once you've now written an interesting argument or two, then maybe we'll start shifting our focus to structural coherence. So this is the category that relates to how do you develop your argument? How does it unfold? Are you strategically and effectively using things like topic sentences to introduce and separate your different ideas? Are you incorporating like key terms that are central to your argument that you reuse throughout the paper to keep that coherence, to keep that focus? Is there movement and development to your argument, right? So are you not just repeating the same thing in every body paragraph, but rather building upon it and growing in complexity as the paper progresses? Again, structural coherence is really more of like an A-B level conversation. So while we're still early in the semester, while we're still all trying to get a passing paper under our belt, focus on close reading, focus on coming up with an original argument. And then we will go from there, okay? There's more kind of like policy information about how grading works and how much papers are worth and how they factor into your final grade. Again, I'm making this video for both basic comp and XPOS, and those policies look a little bit different for you guys, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But I'd say look it all over, right? Look over the grading criteria, look over that document that I posted about suggested structure and approaches for these papers, look back at the grading breakdown in the syllabus, and then as always, if you have questions, please reach out, okay? So we'll be working on these essays. We'll be working with this grading criteria all semester. So this was just a quick little introduction. Expect much more detail and information to follow as the months chug on, all right? So good luck writing. I really look forward to reading what you guys come up with.